Yeah, I can introduce the speakers, and yeah, it looks like everyone's already starting to put their names and the tribes they work for in the chat box. We will pause after each speaker. We have 4 speakers today and take a couple of questions, but we'll probably wait until the end of the session to take most of the questions. We're going to have first a speaker from HUD, Sarah Olson, will be talking about their programs and tribal water infrastructure programs, just to make sure everyone's in the right session this morning. So we'll have Sarah first talk about the HUD infrastructure programs. Jeff Hayes is here from USDA Rural Development, and he'll speak second. And then we also have Dan Wallis from the Indian Health Service. He's in the Phoenix area. And then I will speak about EPA's tribal water infrastructure programs. And if you have questions throughout the presentations, feel free to put those in the chat box and we'll be monitoring those. If you have a specific question for a specific person or agency, feel free to type that in as well. And we'll get to those questions at the end of each presentation and then at the very end of the session. We have 2 hours today, so we have quite a bit of time, but we do want to try to minimize the time in between and focus on those questions at the end. And then when we do have a time for questions, you can also raise your hand and we'll be monitoring that as well. But we're going to start with Sarah Olson first. Sarah, if you want to go ahead and share your screen and your presentation, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. Okay. There we go. Hi, and thank you, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending. My name again is Sarah Olson. I work with the HUD's Office of Native American Programs out of the Phoenix area.
And Sarah, you are sharing your screen in the notes mode. I don't know if you want to try to make that bigger as a presenter mode.
Sure. You might have to help me with how to do that because I don't, oh, here, display settings.
Yes, you would go in display settings and then swap, yes.
Okay, oh, perfect. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
That's something we didn't have that in any of the practice sessions, but thank you. And again, HUD's mission, of course, it goes beyond housing, making sure that communities create strong, sustainable, inclusive communities, those that are culturally relevant to communities. And we have 3 major programs that we work with out of HUD's Office of Native American Programs, the Indian Housing Block Grant, which is formula-based or quasi-entitlement, and then Indian Community Development Block Grant, which is a competitive process. And then whenever there's exigent circumstances, then there's another pot of funds called Imminent Threat under the ICDBG program that can be accessed per occurrence, given certain situations. For instance, we've had water systems that have gone down, and that was the only source of funds that could help it. So there's an abbreviated process to obtain those funds. We have some other resources. The first 2 are our loan guarantee program, Section 184, which can be at the household level or the tribal community level. And we also have the Title VI program where a tribe can take the need portion. I believe it's five times the need portion in the future and get that as money today and then use the IHBG allocation to pay back the payments on that grant over a specified period of time. We also have resources that are helpful in our environmental division and also on Code Talk, which is a repository for many things, whether it's specific from HUD or a sister agency. And also we have an information bulletin that goes out pretty much once a week, and that's full of all kinds of information and resources. And one thing that you might want to do is go to your HUD Grants Management Division page and see for the communities that you work with who your grants management specialist would be, and contact them and have a discussion about how you could make water system, wastewater system improvements in your community, whether they're new or improvements to existing. And also, again, our environmental, the Code Talk pages and the SWON app information bulletin are also great resources. The first major program, the Indian Housing Block Grant, that can help with the infrastructure and direct planning and the other soft kinds of costs that might be necessary. And it can be for above ground or below ground infrastructure. And basically, this is a program where if the infrastructure benefited the whole community, then the portion of the IHBG grant funds you could use, for example, if 50% of the people lived in affordable housing in the community, then half of the costs could get charged to the IHBG program and the other half to some other sources. Also with IHBG, it can be the infrastructure on an existing lot for a unit of affordable housing. And in that case, you would look at the household level, making sure that household is verified low income. And this can be part of housing rehab or new housing construction. And then in red, we have program guidance that you can look at for additional clarifications. Also, the second program, ICDBG, that can be for new or improved or expansions or extensions of existing infrastructure, whether it's water, wastewater, electrical, renewable. It can go on into any other kind of infrastructure that's relevant. And in this case, for area-wide kinds of infrastructure, you just have to make sure the community is at least 51% low mod and primarily residential, which I think would be, for the most part, very easy to do with the rural nature of most tribal communities. And ICDBG also, you can acquire property or easements, rights of way for the infrastructure. You can take care of the actual physical improvement of the infrastructure and any clearance or demolition that might be needed to make it go forward. And again, this has to meet what we call a primary objective. And that's where, besides an eligible activity, you have to show that it predominantly benefits low income people. So again, at least 51% low income. And for ICDBG, you can also fund public services, maybe to help people to use water conservation methods, have training along those lines. And also it can be used for interim assistance if there's some public exigency that causes the sewer lines to bubble up over ground and you need to secure those through temporary methods while the environmental or a more permanent solution is taken care of. That's a possibility. In ICDBG, even though it's federal, it can be used as non-federal match. You just have to cite that in whatever activity you're leveraging those funds with. And then of course at the 1003 regulations, there's a list of basic eligible activities as a source reference. Also with ICDBG, again, it can be like IHBG, the infrastructure on an existing lot. And again, in this case, the household would have to be verified low income, and the cost would then be part of the housing rehab or new housing construction activity. ICDBG imminent threat, and that's where you can get up to $450,000 per occurrence for something that happened because of an act of nature and not lack of maintenance. But if there's a presidential declaration, you can get up to $900,000. And then there's just a very abbreviated process. If someone's familiar with the ICDBG competitive application process, this process here for imminent threat is a small fragment of that. And then basically the purpose of the funds would be to lessen or remove altogether the health and safety issue. And it requires a third-party verification. Usually someone like IHS agrees that yes, it's a public exigency. And some examples of things we've funded include washed out roadways and water system replacements. And then again, the 1000 regs 400 to 402, and our most current notice of funding availability will walk you through the abbreviated process. Title VI was one of the loan guarantee programs, and that can be used to build infrastructure at today's prices. And then a portion of the Indian Housing Block Grant formula funds that the tribe would get would then be used to pay back the loan over a certain amount of time. I think it's 20 years generally. And then 184 is the other loan guarantee, and that can be used on or off reservation. In some states, basically it's good anywhere. For some tribes, it's good on reservation lands, and others may not yet have the ordinances that are needed to utilize this program, but it's something that you can work with. It just, for a while, there weren't any 184 activities going on, but they're back online again. And it can be used, I guess in this case, for water systems. It could be used in the rehab or new construction activity, but it also can be used for homeowners that are struggling with more conventional loans and maybe could get refinanced under this. Again, eligible applicants for this could be the tribe itself, the tribally designated housing entity, or tribal members. Then we have right now we have IHBG competitive, which is up to $5 million per year. The priority, is new housing construction to add additional units. But with that additional units, of course, there's infrastructure that can be needed. So you could package that new infrastructure in with it. We also have had Indian Housing Block Grant CARES funds to take care of COVID-related issues. And it's possible that those funds are already in a housing plan with us for certain activities. But if it has a COVID-related purpose and the tribe is desirous of doing so, then you can amend that housing plan with us and then use it for water systems that might help people to better be able to take care of the stay-at-home orders and live more comfortably during these unusual times. And the same with ICDBG CARES, that too, if there is a amendment that needs to be taken care of, we can entertain those and have those discussions. And then here's my contact information, but I encourage you to look on our website and find the community that you work with and talk with your specialist that's responsible to those communities. And if you have trouble finding it, you can contact me and I'll make sure I get you in contact with them. And thank you. That completes my presentation.
Thank you, Sarah.
Yes.
I'm looking for questions right now. Sorry, there's a little bit of an echo there. We do have one question that came in.
Mm-hmm.
Since 24 CFR 1003 determines a person's financial eligibility, how often is it updated to reflect living inflation and other common hardships like COVID, unemployment?
Oh, that's a great question. The regulation just says that somebody has to be at least somebody or their family, which would be all the people living in the household, regardless if they're married or not. And or if they're, have blood ties or whatever. It's just the family is who all lives in the house, regardless of their relationship. But they have to be at least 80% of or below of average median income for the area. So pretty much those figures change every year, but may or may not be in line with some of the more unusual things that we're dealing with and those types of hardships that the coronavirus has brought more to light. But even if you were funded for an activity today but weren't going to house that person, you'd be looking at an income scale 2 years from now. It would be the relevant income at scale at the time the services are provided. And for ICDBG, that's when the key is given to take the house. That's when the income qualification point starts. Does that help? Or
Okay, let us know in the chat box if that doesn't answer your question. Sarah, if you want to take on your presentation, you'll have Jeff.
okay.
Is up. I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat box right now. So maybe we can move over to Jeff, and if there are questions at the end, before you take those.
Okay, thank you.
And just want to remind everyone to go ahead and mute their lines. It sounds like there's a little bit of an echo, so I just want to that Jeff doesn't have that when he presents.
Thank you.
Okay, go ahead, Jeff.
All right, so set up. Can you see the screen? Just to check, make sure.
Yep, we can see that.
Okay, great. All right. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Jeff Hayes, and I'm the Community Programs Director for Arizona. We have my counterparts. They've got me listed as Cheryl Couch, but I'm not Cheryl. But we have offices in each of the states that are represented here, and so our programs are pretty much duplicated within each state. We always try to encourage people to start with a conversation on these programs. Because just like HUDs, there's a lot of diversity of programming, and sometimes it's easier to talk about the project, not so much about the specific need, but how do we fund the whole process. That way we're not just pigeonholing an issue. But I kind of want to start with a highlight of all the programs real quick, just to touch base on this. Of course, we do have our housing programs, both single family, multifamily, and workforce. One of the things we are trying to work on is bringing housing, transitional or permanent housing for workforce, for those with hospitals, public safety that are struggling to find housing, and becomes a recruitment issue. That is a program that we would fund under our facilities program, actually. But most of our housing we recognize is generally as the 504 home repair programs, which are always essential, especially for seniors. We'll just focus on our infrastructure programs today for populations under 10, but also one of the programs we do universally is our community facilities program. Those are for populations under 20,000. And it covers pretty much anything a community would need. These are generally loans, but we do have small grants for those, anywhere from medical, public safety, schools, etc. And the grants, typically we do those around $50,000 or so. And then last of all, of course, our business development, which we use a lot for private businesses, but we actually get into a lot of the small business development programming and planning through our small business development grants. So, and we also partner with a lot of the, this is hiding my screen here. Planning, if we're doing regional planning, there are a lot of additional set-asides that we use that match up with either a economic development subs plan, or it could be a multi-community plan within a tribal organization, etc. It just allows us to tap into other pools of money. So that's why we always say it's sometimes always better just start with the question about the problem, the concern, and let us help us try to navigate the community through what the needs are and availability of funding, rather than just assuming that there's a specific fit there. So, but today we're obviously talking about our water environmental programs, which is typically water and wastewater disposal. And we do our normal program, and our anchor program is our loan and grant program, which is really bringing in clean and reliable drinking water and waste disposal to homes and businesses in the area. We treat everybody as one unit. And we try to break down the businesses into what we would call equivalent dwelling units, so that we're balancing, matching apples to apples with the communities. And our goal on these are actually to really address and bring the water systems up to current operating standards, but also make sure that they're sustainable, making sure they're putting the proper reserves in and funding those replacement reserves, but also making sure that any debt that we put on a project, if necessary, is sustainable. So we will go up to a certain point in that methodology to then look at what is their cost of our operations related to other community systems, whether it's tribal or non-tribal within that region, because every region obviously has its unique problems or concerns. And so we want to make sure we're, again, comparing and keeping everybody's rates at comparable sources there. So all, of course, eligible programs, federally recognized tribes are eligible for all of our programs. And uniquely with that also is that the rural status is usually they're always considered rural. So we've actually had projects where we funded other programs actually in urban areas because the tribe's been absorbed and gentrified around them. So again, most federally recognized tribes are there, and most tribal trust lands are eligible. The loan terms that we do under programs are up to 40 years. Right now, the interest rate is right at 1.25. It's the next to the lowest it's ever been in history. So we're encouraging people to look at that because it's obviously making that reasonable to get the projects financed. And once we do prove the project, it's locked in at that rate. So even if rates change, you're guaranteed to get that interest rate at that point. We do provide, when we talk about sustainability on our projects, we are looking at then once we hit a certain amount of debt service and making those projects, the operational expenses, the debt service, and once we reach that threshold where we're feeling we're exceeding what another similar system would be, then we start looking at our normal grant program to apply those grants to offset those capital costs in that process. And then another element to that, what we've found has been very helpful in the last few years, is we've opened up a pre-development planning grants. These are search and pre-development. The search is basically both of them are $30,000 grants that allows us to actually do enough pre-development work to get you the preliminary engineering report, environmental, done enough to bring the project up to where we have the concept that we can fund, and then we can then roll into the next point and bring it up. So we're finding that a lot of tribes and small communities don't have those pre-development dollars, and this is essentially an over-the-counter process, so that there's no timing or cycles on this thing. When we have a budget, the money's available, and we're funding those. So this has helped us get a lot of projects into a pipeline so that usually we can start that, and then by within 6 months we're committing funds to the larger scale project. So kind of going back in a little more details, again, we talked about the primary loans or direct. We do also have a guaranteed loan program, which would maybe address for larger, more higher income communities that could get bank financing, but that is a new program that's been rolled out this year. Grants are great. We'd love to help that with the communities, obviously, but they are limited. The unique thing, unfortunately, with tribal set-asides is we do have additional product funding. It's limited to $2 million per product, but allows us to either blend that money in with the regular sources to increase that grant capacity and keep the project affordable. But there are cases with this very low income communities or remote projects that we're able to just directly fund the product with the set aside, especially smaller scale, which is usually treatment or small line extensions. And when I talk about this, we are looking at mostly servicing and repairing systems that are existing communities. We do not, rarely do we ever go into a project where we can fund new development, but it can be a part of or a component of a project if the capacity is factored in. And there have been cases on an exception basis where there's a community that's in a distressed area from either flood zones or other elements that are causing a public safety issue for that community, where we can then basically relocate those homes. Then there's a case to be made to relocate a water system to that community, but those other properties would have to be obviously be abandoned. So, but we have done those here in Arizona as well. So another programs we also do, again, we've talked about the search grants, but again, those are over the counter, very simple, but they really help get the ball rolling and get these products up to a point where then we can make those commitments for funding. But we also, on a broader scale, we fund technical assistance. We have a circuit rider program that's funded both through the Rural Water Association and Rural Community Assistance Corporation. And that program is accessible to everybody, any systems. We really encourage them because they provide a lot of technical expertise and training throughout the year. They're available on call. And if there's emergency situations coming up with water quality or other disaster elements, they can come out and provide technical help to actually help mitigate those issues on a short-term basis. But we also have generally a technical assistance training program as well. We've done a lot of those here in Arizona, and each state pretty much has those, but there's a provider, but basically doing local training, whether it's compliance training or trainer programming. And then we have a similar program for solid waste management as well. So these are programs usually run through intermediary groups, but it's available to any organization that's eligible for it. Just a note on our funding cycles, of course, obviously, like most federal agencies, we're on October to September 30th programming. So once we have money, as we do now with continuing resolution, we expect funds to start flowing pretty much in November. And then but our sweet spot, our funding always is generally January through August and September, obviously, to get those projects out there. So, but we accept applications year round. So there's never a time, it is never too soon to start talking to a representative and get the project scoped out. Let us help you try to frame out the best case scenario for that, because sometimes what you see on the NOFAs and stuff don't always the best fit, and it allows us to internalize the project and see if we can find other resources or opportunities that may not necessarily always be out and open or clear to the public. And the summer programs like the training, so those are typically issued through NOFAs and such. But again, we really just like to start with a conversation, because as we do that, we also usually find that there's other community needs that are involved. And since our community program staff handle both facilities and wastewater and water, it allows us to provide a little bit more resources and technical support to get other community needs addressed. And just a little more detail on the Native American set-aside. These can be used for construction of basic water and waste disposal systems and eligible to any federally recognized Indian tribe. The project must be in an eligible area, but again, most tribal trust lands are eligible. And the applicants must meet the per capita income, which is generally 80% of the median household income for the state. So generally, we don't have any issues with that, but as we would do in tribal projects in many rural communities as well. So, but that is one where, again, it's limited to $2 million per project, but it also has the ability to go in and actually just step in and fund the project directly. We move fairly quickly. We do have to have the preliminary engineering report done, which we can use the search grant to fund as well. So again, starting that conversation helps us move the projects forward, find your best resources. And then also sometimes we do run into situations, just like HUD brought up, is that we have emergency situations, whether it's been failures of water systems or the contaminations come into play, or there's been a disaster element where there's been physical breaks in the lines or fires, things like that have been impacted. So long as there's a designation or there's other things may not even be physically designated, but there have been natural disasters in that areas, we can utilize and access funding for both water supply and distribution for those as well. And it's just another component. So when we look at that, we always try to have that interview questions to see, was there a problem? And we can go back to at least 3 years prior to the incident or the decline in the quality to address that and keep the project eligible. Other things that are eligible, of course, legal fees, engineering. Again, when we're funding a project entirely on the concept. So the expectation is you're not gone into design at this point. We are really just looking at the general scope of the project and alternatives to address it. And then, but in that point, we're addressing your legal engineering fees to the point of throughout the construction project. Land acquisition rights and equipment can be done. And if it's a new startup project or it's a major overhaul, we can provide startup operations and maintenance costs included for the first year. And also we can actually provide other systems. So we've had community systems where tribes have been interested in buying out a local regional system that possibly provide service, or it's taken over another community to do that. And so one of the new things we've been doing over the last couple of years, we've actually gone on fully online to what we call RD Apply. It's an online application process. We've pretty much mandated now to be doing this. Last year was our first year forcing that into us. And what it does enable is really the applicants get qualified. They go into the system. We get them into the system through our programming. Then at that point, we're able to basically merge all the information that's been input by the community into our underwriting software, which saves a huge amount of duplication, also eliminates a lot of errors, and it allows us to speed the project up significantly. And so pretty much everything, there's no more copies and pasting, everything is done electronically, and all the files are uploaded that way. So we find that to be an extreme help in timing. And of course, we're there and provide assistance. We also use, again, our circuit riders like Rural Water and RCAC. They're out there. They can actually provide and hands-on help to walk you through that process, because obviously it's just like any new system. There's some tricks to learn the process, but there's resources out there to help get that thing going and get started. And once you're in, then it's basically duplication for future projects. And basically, I like to mention a little bit about the circuit rider program. These can assist on technical day-to-day operational issues, financial management, general public management issues if there's a board of directors for the water system or the utility authority, as well as energy audit. So there's a lot of free resources through our circuit rider program that are available, and we suggest and we always encourage people to participate on that. And again, there's usually 1 to 3 people in every state that's available to provide that assistance. So basically that's it. I've got my contact information here, Jeff Hayes, jeff.hayes@usda.gov. Cheryl Couch is my counterpart in Nevada. Currently, there is no program director in place. They're hiring a person for California. So if you have questions about that, please you can feel free to contact myself or Cheryl, and we can direct you to the proper person once they get placed, or state director at a minimum there in California. And with that, that's my end of my presentation. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Jeff. And we did get a question as you were speaking, and okay. It's actually a couple of parts here. It says, what are the steps to ultimately obtain funding for infrastructure improvement to increase supply and storage for tribal communities? Planning, design, environmental review, etc. And how long would it take from start to finish, from planning to turning on the faucet? And we had a follow-up comment that they were also interested in how long it would take for that process for average length of time to get funding.
So if we're starting with the first call, going through using a search program to fund that project, you're typically about 90 days to get. We've done search grants as fast as a week. It depends on really the information provided to us, which is general inquiry information. So the fastest we're able to get the program funded, I'd say within 30 days, we can get the search fund on a normal application process and get those funded. Then from there, it's working with your engineering firm to do that preliminary design, which is typically about a 90-day process. And upon that 90-day completion and our review, we can actually be committing funding within another 60 days. So you're really looking at about a 6-month process from start to finish. What we usually find is there's just gaps in turnover of staff and consultants that tend to delay the process. But with this streamlined system there, we're able to pretty much start and finish. We've done that this last 2 years. We've funded several projects start to finish with that within 6-month time frame. Now, in terms of getting construction, that depends on the complexity of it, obviously. But if it's a simple fix, that's easy. But typical design process alone, once we've committed the money, the project goes in design, and that's usually a 6-month process at minimum, and then the bidding. So you're usually about a year out typically from the time we obligate funds to actually in the ground construction. We're 9 months to a year after the design started. I wish it was a quick fix, but we have been able to do that. And sometimes there are cases where we're able to, if it's a simple product, to maneuver around some of the requirements if it's possible. If it's just, and we just did this with a small community here where their wells both wells went down, and we were able to actually get the money committed based on the repair estimates instead of a full design report.
Great, thank you, Jeff. Yes, oftentimes Sure. There's a quick or easy response, especially when construction is concerned. So let's see, we have one more question, and then we will turn it over to Dan. Actually, this is Sarah. Sarah, do you want to go ahead and ask or answer the question that you had put in the chat box?
I saw I don't know that I completely answered the gentleman's question before about the 1003 regulations and how often they're updated to deal with things like inflation or COVID and such. But I gave an answer saying that basically under the regulation, the individual or household has to be low income at the time service is provided, and low income would be for HUD at or below 80% of the average median income for the area. And while the regulation may not be updated, the income limits are generally generated at least annually. And then under ICDBG CARES and IHBG CARES, there's statutory and regulatory waivers that may help when it comes to looking at income and eligibility.
Great. Okay, thank you. And it looks like that's all the questions. Loretta did post a reminder in the chat box too to make sure you sign in with your name and the tribe that you are from or that work for. So we're going to go ahead and hand it over to Dan
Thank you.
Wallis from IHS. Thank you, Jeff. Dan, we see your presentation is up, but I don't hear you right now.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's great. Thank you, Dan.
Excellent. I had to double click my mute button. Thank you. First off, thank you, Nancy, for allowing me to provide SFC program information to Region 9 tribes, and thank you for having this conference. I think it's very valuable. My name's Dan Wallis. I'm the SFC Director for the Phoenix area, and I'll be providing information that may have the Phoenix area twist to it, but as Region 9 provides services that encapsulates Tucson area, California area, Phoenix area, and Navajo, I'll do my best to kind of provide the overall program information. So the topics I'm going to cover today are authorities, mission, and the area offices, the overview of types of sanitation facilities needs and projects, the type of funding that we provide, and our sanitation deficiency system, SDS. And I'm going to give a plug now and a plug later. At 2:35 today, Jonathan Rash out of the California area will be providing additional information to take a deeper dive into the sanitation deficiency system. So with this presentation, it's more of a overview and all of the types of funding. So the SFC program was authorized under Public Law 86-121 in 1959. It created the program. It gives the SFC program the authority to provide essential water supply and sewage facilities. And it also provides the unique arrangement to establish memorandums of agreements with tribes. So it's a little different than sort of the application process and then a grant following or a project-based funding following. And then under Public Law 94-437, the Indian Healthcare Improvement Act in 1988, it created the SDS reporting system and deficiency levels. And that's it's basically an objective reporting system to define need, health impact, and create sort of an objective process for allocating funds. So the SFC mission activities are as follows. So in partnership with tribes, the SFC program provides the following services: maintains an inventory of sanitation deficiencies, environmental engineering assistance, project development, funding, professional design and construction services. We are a cadre of engineers, and so I'm a professional engineer. We're mainly let's see, for the Phoenix area, we have 30 engineers and 20 other staff in the SFC program. So we're a very engineering heavy program. We don't necessarily have funding or financial professionals that deliver the services. So we have a little different take, I think, on the funding program because of that. We're advocate for tribes on environmental public health issues. We provide O&M training and technical consultation, particularly as it relates to following installation of projects where SFC funds have been utilized. And we also, in limited circumstances, provide emergency response services. So here is the national landscape, I guess. This shows all of the different IHS areas. And these aren't necessarily SFC specific, so these areas are defined based upon the Indian Health Service at large. And as you can see, for Region 9, it's California, Phoenix, Navajo, and Tucson. So you take kind of those 4 states that encapsulate that, and that's the Region 9 tribes. So prior to moving into the director role for Phoenix area SFC, not that I was around in 1959, but I was the Reno District utility consultant and Reno District district engineer. And within that district is Elko, Nevada, and that's actually the first SFC project. And you can see that at the time there were only privies and no running water on the colony. And since then, things have vastly improved. At the time, you know, just having that sort of outhouse or privy was kind of the definition of an improvement of a sanitation facility. And now we are really looking at much more complex projects and you know, looking towards the EPA's requirements for drinking water to set the bar for what we consider sufficient sanitation facilities today. Just some example projects. IHS, as we do provide engineering assistance and technical assistance when it comes to construction inspection and technical assistance to tribe for construction management. We are heavily involved out in the field, and so some of these photos are taken by our engineers and our engineering technicians out in the field. Some nice big water mains, some sewer facilities there, floating lagoon cover, or actually it's not a cover, that's a lined lagoon here. So one of the congressional requirements is to maintain the sanitation efficiency system database, and that's, you know, we do our best in obtaining information from tribes in partnership to assess the need of deficiencies or sanitation deficiencies. And on a yearly basis, this need is reported to Congress. Right now, within the Phoenix area, we are finalizing all of our SDS projects, we call them, which really is basically it's a deficiency that's defined as in dollars the amount of work that it would take, what's the planning and construction going to cost to satisfy or fix the deficiency. And so, and nationally, that equates to $2.57 billion in total need and $866 million in what is called feasible need. And feasibility is basically defined by the area, but it has its limits. And so a feasible construction project would be considered, you know, depending on the level of deficiency, it may mean $25,000 per home can be provided, while a high level deficiency, we call it, it has a range of 0 to 4, say a deficiency level 4, you may have $50,000 per home is considered feasible. So as you see, there's a really large need out there that currently, per our system, is not considered feasible. And that's due to the amount to bring the current sanitation facilities for any particular home may, say, be $150,000. So those types of projects would be considered infeasible under the current structure. So here's some national numbers of the funding provided. And I tried to get the FY 2020 numbers, but we don't have that yet. So FY19 nationally, I was able to pull together, and there was $192 million appropriation. And as you can see, the feasible need is 833. So that's less than 25% funds are appropriated by Congress to meet feasible need. And that's actually up from historical. I remember giving some of these presentations 10 or 15 years ago, and the appropriations were around 5, 6, 7% of the feasible need. So things have improved some, but there's still lots of work to be done, lots of sanitation facilities to be provided. And then you can see we also work in partnership with other funding agencies such as HUD, EPA, and USDA. So we also help tribes manage the projects when there are several funding partners involved. Nationally, in FY19, you can see some of the numbers here: 424 projects funded, 43,000 homes, 471 homes served, 258 projects completed construction, and then the average project duration is 3.6 years. So that project duration is following planning, and then when construction is funded, that would be the process for putting together bidding documents, the design, putting together bidding documents, going out to bid, and then actually building the facilities. And some projects can get done a lot quicker, say a simple water main or a simple individual sanitation facilities. Those could be done in under a year. But some of the larger projects, if you have a very complex RCN water treatment plant or something like that, that type of project, with a pilot study and things may take 5 or 6 years. So this is just, I'm providing this as an example. Here are some of Phoenix area's numbers. For this year, was we had got a $9.6 million allotment, over 6.1 million in contributed funds from other agencies and tribes. Tribes also are contribute funds as partners in our projects, and then 47 projects were funded. And this includes housing projects, not just the SDS funded projects that we really are focused on oftentimes because they are correcting a deficiency. And then also care, we had a special funding that came from the CARES Act this year as well. So here are the 4 types of SFC funding for projects. Housing, that's to serve new or like new housing, and BIA HIP homes. So that would be for new single construction homes or new or like new homes that have individual sanitation needs, or for a new development. That's what we usually allocate housing funds for. Regular projects would be to serve existing housing, community or individual systems. Special projects, so that would be studies, training, or other needs related to sanitation facilities construction. And that's a very limited amount of money, and the dollars are generally quite limited as far as the amount that can be used for those studies. Oftentimes our planning projects, we utilize our regular project funds for those. Then there are emergency projects. Those are projects that need to, there's an exigent need due to an emergency situation. I've been involved with emergency projects related to funding, related to flooding, related to fires, those sorts of things. So this you could, I guess, consider an act of God sort of situation. And then the 2020 CARES Act funding, that was just specific to this year for emergent needs related to the COVID-19 pandemic. And there may be another allocation for that. We really don't know at this point. So the 2 primary SFC funding types are regular and housing funds. Talk about those. So housing funds are used to provide water and wastewater service to new or like new Indian homes. Headquarters allocates these annual funds based on a total anticipated need. So this would be kind of predicting in the future housing developments or some new single homes that are going to be built, and funds are allocated based on kind of a predictive nature. And then other considerations that are included are dates of application. So we have these scattered sites applications for single homes where the homeowner actually gets involved with the tribal concurrence to the application. And then the date of the home, constructed in occupation, and documented health issues may, bump up that need for that individual home use service. Regular funds. So this is the larger pot of money, so to speak, and this is the one that uses it's a relatively complex system, the sanitation deficiency system, using 8 points of need or points assignment. SDS is a database of proposed projects to correct existing sanitation deficiencies. So this isn't one that's a predictive nature. This is a project that is funded based on a verified and documented existing conditions. And it's the primary tool to fund community projects. And we also, here's the EPA Clean Water Act set aside, which Nancy will speak to. So each area updates the SDS annually and reports to SFC headquarters by August 1st. That's not to say we don't still kind of work through the numbers and try to prepare each projects that seem like they're close to funding for the actual congressional reporting in November. Annual updates allows SDS to add new projects, update existing projects, and new funded projects. The annual SDS listing is reported to Congress to officially document all of the known sanitation deficiencies. And so that's that November report date. Typically, areas receive IHS regular allotments to fund SDS project in the early part of the following year. And that's really dictated on when Congress passes the budget each year. I would love to say that we have funds regular funds ready by February or March, but historically, in my 17 years with the Indian Health Service, it generally is more of a May through July timeframe when the allotment can actually be dispersed and obligated to specific projects. Some typical SDS projects are water projects for drinking water systems, community or individual, sewer projects for community or individual systems. So that would be everything that's involved with a sewer, right? Collection, pumping, disposal, even septic systems. Those are our individual systems. Solid waste infrastructure. So that would be transfer stations. There are some, we do have a new SDS guidance this last 2019 solid waste. There's a little bit more to it, and hopefully Captain Rash, Jonathan Rash this afternoon will be able to dive a little deeper into some of that. All the deficiencies of projects are for existing homes and systems and conditions. So this is just a brief breakdown of how we score our SDS projects. There's health impact, efficiency level, previous service, capital cost, O&M capability, the contribution from the tribe or another agency that goes through the tribe. So if it were USDA rural development, they applied for, say, the 306C, and that contribution would be considered tribal contribution because the tribe has an individual agreement with USDA to acquire those funds. There's the tribal contribution. And then there's another considerations point, which actually is a negative score if for some reason a project is not scoped well or not identified well, or there are issues with the justification for the project. So we've been asked to put a negative consideration point. So we'll get funding because it's not, perhaps the project isn't ready for funding yet. There's still way too many unknowns, say. So this is one of the new, for those of you that are familiar with SDS, but it has changed this last year. We have got new national guidance that was issued in September 2019. So now projects are ranked by a tier structure as well as all of that scoring. And this tier structure is based upon how close the project is to shovel ready. So one of the things that we're trying to mitigate with this is the risk of receiving construction funding prior to the project really being ready for construction. It hasn't maybe been scoped well enough, or it hasn't been designed to a stage where we can really look and be confident of these accuracies. So you see these accuracy ranges is estimate plus or minus 10%, and it's considered ready to fund for construction. If it's not that close, then let's say plus or minus 25%. It's done some really preliminary engineering, but it's really identified maybe some more issues that need to be dealt with, whether it's a right-of-way, whether it's a NEPA issue, environmental concerns, or whether it's perhaps just the scope of the project hasn't been defined yet. You'd have to put that down into tier 2 and wouldn't provide construction funding for that. So here's some of the key items to remember for all SDS projects is that records, photos, letters, test results, etc., of the deficiency and health impact are required. So that's kind of the justification of the need. That's kind of one of these things that has been kind of a slow change within IHS SFC, where prior, just kind of a written statement of the deficiency was adequate. Well, now we need to really back that up with strong information justifying the problem. So justification documentation is needed to support all of our entries into SDS. We need to be clear, representative, accurate, and quantitative. We need to communicate and from the tribal perspective and between SFC and the tribe to communicate and coordinate early and often so we can meet those deadlines. Prepare and collect the documentation. Oftentimes that's kind of a tribal operations obligation in order to get the project into SDS. And to provide the time to meet with IHS engineers for site reviews, meetings, and a review of all of the updates to the SDS projects on an annual basis. And then one of the other things is the tribe has a priority point that they can put toward each project. And so the top ranking for any given tribe would get 16 points. There's, kind of the second tribal priority might be, it would be given 12 points, et cetera, down to 8, 4. So identifying which projects to put those points toward, both from a tribal, what the tribe desires to have as long, and also to ensure that it's a project that is feasible and within the funding range. Is oftentimes helpful to get projects funded. So that's the majority of my presentation. I do want to give a plug for Captain Rash that's going to be providing a more in-depth look into SDS this afternoon. And our local engineers are the best resource. They understand, generally they're out in the field and understand a lot of the tribal issues with the water and sewer systems. And to find contact info, there are the kind of simple websites. I actually made a mistake on that slide now that I noticed this. It's basically, should be Phoenix, this would be California, Tucson, and Navajo, so apologize for that. We don't want everybody coming to Phoenix, but there are issues that we have no understanding of. And then these are our program resources. These are kind of our guiding guidelines, and they're publicly available. We have a criteria document, guide for our SDS program, and our memorandum agreements, which we sign with the tribes in order to execute projects. Those are also provided online. So those are kind of the key pieces that make our program, provide the boundaries and limitations and what we can do for tribes within our program. Thank you very much. That's the end of my presentation.
Great. Great, thank you, Dan. I'm not seeing any questions right now, so I'll wait a couple minutes to see if anything pops up. I will say there was a comment posted from Nick from RCAC with a great reminder that RCAC does provide technical assistance and training at no cost to tribes. So that's always a good resource, as well as the resources we're talking about today that are financial infrastructure resources. And then just another reminder that the slides are posted on the conference website. All of the presentations that we've seen here today, as well as mine that's coming next, are there, as well as a fact sheet from EPA that talks a little bit more about the infrastructure programs that I'll talk about in a couple of minutes. If you have any problems finding those slides, you can reach out to me, or the conference hosts, I'm sure, can help you find those as well. We do have one question that came in for you, Dan. Can you give examples of 2020 CARES Act funds for emergent needs related to COVID-19 on tribal lands?
Yes. So one of the projects was, was to provide personal protective equipment for tribal operators, and that was basically a $50,000 purchase. And our utility consultants will be distributing that equipment as it trickles in. There's because of the pandemic, a lot of PPE is very challenging to get. And so that's one example. Another example is for, let me think, a tribe that had a well pump that had failed. Normally, a well pump failure we would consider not an eligible type of project, more an O&M responsibility. And so that well pump failure purchase a new well pump was able to be funded through CARES Act.
Great, thank you. And I think that's all the questions for now. We will have time at the end of my presentation to answer questions from others as well. So Loretta's going to help me out with presentation that she's brought up for me. So I'm going to talk today about the EPA Region 9 Tribal Water Infrastructure Programs, basically the funding for our Clean Water Indian Set-Aside, which are for wastewater projects, and the Drinking Water Tribal Set-Aside. Next slide. So I'll start first with the Drinking Water Tribal Set-Aside. I'm not sure if you can quite see that whole slide, but I will talk a little bit from that. So a little history. We started a tribal set-aside from the overall SRF program, the Clean Water or the Drinking Water SRF program. The tribal set-aside was initially established at 1.5%, and that's increased to 2% over the years, starting in 2010. And in 2016, EPA also added a funding floor for projects or for the set-aside, which means basically if the 2% is less than 20 million, EPA would still receive $20 million for the tribal set-aside for drinking water. So that helps in those years where the infrastructure funding is not as great as it has been in the past. Tribes are still going to receive a certain amount of funding. And for FY20, we had a total drinking water SRF of $1.1 billion. That national set-aside was a little more than $20 million. And then the allocation that came to Region 9 was $7.5 million. In FY20, we actually awarded about $11 million for 20 drinking water tribal set-aside projects. And you'll see there's a little bit of a discrepancy in the amount we were allocated, and we were able to award actually much more. And that's due to a couple of things. One is the transfer authority, which I'll talk about in a minute, but also just receiving funds from de-obligated projects as well. This is the history in the last 10 years of the drinking water set-aside for Region 9. The national allocation is listed there as well. You'll see that in 2016 and 2017, that funding floor came into effect, and we were still able to get the $20 million for tribes. And for the past several years, we've gotten a little bit more than that in funding. So what types of projects are fundable? So we can install and upgrade treatment facilities. We can also install new transmission, distribution, and service lines to connect existing homes to public water supply. We can install and upgrade storage facilities, including finished water reservoirs. We can install and replace transmission and distribution lines and replace aging infrastructure if it's needed to comply with the Safe Drinking Water Act or to meet the health protection goals of the Safe Drinking Water Act. In addition, we can also fund the expansion, consolidation, and development of new public water system. In some circumstances, we can develop preliminary engineering reports. So planning for those construction projects, we can also fund that part of it. And we can rehabilitate and develop sources. We also have the ability to fund water efficiency projects like the installation of meters. What we can't fund. So the big one that we're always asked about is operation and maintenance. So that's something that we cannot fund, but we can, and we can also not fund the compliance monitoring to comply with the Safe Drinking Water Act. We can't fund projects that are intended primarily for future growth, and we can't fund projects that are related to water rights. Some of the others are listed on that slide as well. More things that we can't fund are projects needed primarily for fire protection. So we can fund projects that have components related to fire protection, but if the primary purpose of the project is for fire protection, that's not something we can fund. And similarly, we can't fund projects that serve mainly commercial uses. And again, we can fund projects that may serve commercial properties, and we may ask for a contribution for that portion of the system. But if the primary purpose of the project is to fund a commercial operation, that's not something we can fund. Eligibility requirements. So public water systems serving tribal communities are all eligible for funding. We can fund both community and nonprofit non-community water systems. If the system is in significant non-compliance with drinking water standards, that's not a project that we will be able to fund. If the system can come into compliance before the funding is awarded, that's definitely something we could work through if you're in that situation. As well as a certified operator, we can't award funding without a certified operator for the system. We would ask that that operator be put in place before we award the funding. Additionally, if we are going to fund a construction project, we would just require that the project is completely scoped and planned before we provide the planning or the construction portion of that. We can fund the planning separate from the construction. So we do that in a lot of cases and have done that over the years. We will also ensure that the utility for the system has the technical, managerial, and financial capacity to run the water system. Next slide. So we use a solicitation process for the drinking water tribal set-aside, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, which is a little bit different than we do for the clean water set-aside. So with that solicitation, we have health categories and priorities that we use in our ranking. And those health, the main priorities that are of concern are bacteriological contamination, unfiltered surface water that may not be meeting the surface water treatment rule, and if there are significant deficiencies or sanitary defects, those are also a priority for funding. If the water supply serves fewer than 30 gallons per capita per day, that will also be a priority for us. And if there's a water supply deficiency resulting in water outages, we will also address those up to a system that's serving 150 gallons per capita per day. For a full list of those health rankings, those are in our solicitation, and I'll provide a website for that in a couple of slides. We also have incentivized drought and conservation in our ranking criteria. We want to make sure that we're prioritizing systems that are serving fewer than 30 gallons per person per day. And those are in drought circumstances, those systems may be at that point. And then we also would ask for a contribution for systems that are serving over 150 gallons per capita per day. We want to really incentivize conserving water before we start putting in systems or new sources of water for drinking water. Next slide. So we also have gotten some funding recently through the WIN Act improvements, and that funding in December of 2016 took place, and we have the flexibility now to fund operation and maintenance training and operator certification. So although we're not able to fund actual operation and maintenance, we do have some additional funding to fund training for the operators that are in place. And since 2017, we've used that funding and worked with ITCA to provide operator certification. Okay, so this is the process for our current drinking water tribal set-aside solicitation. That website is there. We sent out the solicitation in September of 2020, and the project proposals will be due in on November 20th, 2020, which is about a month from now, or yes, exactly a month from now. Once those proposals are sent to us, we'll review the information that's been submitted, and we should have final rankings in January of 2021. We'll send letters out to those tribes that submitted proposals, and responses will be due with some additional information that will be requested by March of 2021. After that, between April and July, we'll review those final submissions of information. We'll make our final ranking and funding decisions and notify tribes of those decisions and award the funding by September 2021. And then we'll start over again with the process. That's pretty standard for us, each of those steps along the way. In FY20, we received proposals for more than 50 projects at about $22 million. And we awarded approximately $11 million to 20 drinking water tribal set-aside projects. Next slide. So then we'll get into the Clean Water Indian Set-Aside Program. As I said before, this is the wastewater side of our projects. And again, some history with the Clean Water Tribal Set-Aside. The set-aside was initially established at 0.5%. And again, it was increased to 2%, which is where we're at now. There was a funding floor established for that set-aside as well at $30 million. We generally get more funding for their clean water programs than we do for the drinking water programs. And then this year, about a 1.6 billion total clean water SRF funding, and the set aside from that was about 32 million. Region 9 received 12.5 million. And the regional allocations, unlike the drinking water, which are sent to the region for the entire region, the clean water allocations are sent to the region for specific IHS area offices. So we get an allocation for the Navajo area, the Phoenix area, California, and for Tucson. And I'll talk a little bit more about how those allocations are established, but it has a lot to do with what Dan had talked about and the SDS funding. In FY20, we awarded about 14 million to 18 clean water Indian set-aside projects. And again, that's more than what we were allocated, mostly due to the fact that we received funds from deobligated funds from projects that we had previously funded. Okay, next slide. Again, here's the chart of the last 10 years of funding for the Clean Water Indian Set-Aside. For that program, we also had the funding floor kind of come into play in 2016 and 2017. And since then, we've gotten a little bit more than that funding floor, like a little bit more, 32, 33 million each year. Next slide. Okay, so the eligibility requirements for the Clean Water Indian Set-Aside. All federally recognized tribes are eligible, and funds can be used for planning, design, and construction of wastewater facilities. We provide funding for wastewater projects that are ranked on the IHS SDS list. And so that's why we had Dan present first to give you a little bit more information about how to get your projects on the SDS list, because that's the only way we can fund projects for clean water. There are no matching grant funds required at this time, and we do award our funds through grants and through IAs. and no matching funds for either of those. Projects that are eligible, as I said, planning and design, construction, and we can prepare preliminary engineering reports. We can construct major sewer facilities and also sewer pipelines. We can also fund on-site wastewater treatment systems, septic systems for individual homes, and we can draft as-built for those projects that we funded. Next slide. What we can't fund, again, operation and maintenance is not a fundable activity with the Clean Water Indian set aside. We can't provide repairs to treatment systems in emergency situations, and that's mostly due to just the process of our funding. We have a process that we need to go through to determine those. As Dan mentioned in his presentation, IHS gets a list of SDS projects in August. They review that and finalize it, and we usually receive that in November, and we kind of start the process for selecting projects. It's just not within that timeline to address situations as they may pop up. The one thing that we have done that is emergency related is that we have funded over the past couple of years for both the clean water and the drinking water programs, emergency generators for those facilities that may be impacted by power outages. So that's one thing that we have funded before and would consider in the future. We can't fund indoor residential plumbing for facilities, but oftentimes we will partner with other agencies, HUD, USDA, IHS, and we can fund the sewer lines and things like that. And other agencies might be able to fund the indoor plumbing or even the buildings that we may be constructing in some cases. Okay, the next slide. This is just a little bit about our allocation. So as I mentioned before, we're given the 2% of the clean water SRF for set aside for tribes to fund their projects. And at the same time that we're given that, IHS is developing their SDS list. We get a snapshot of what's an SDS that we can pull from. And that snapshot gives us the need for Indian country. And the allocations for each area office are based on those needs that are listed in SDS when that snapshot is pulled. So really important that you work with IHS to get your information in there in the late winter, early spring, so that those projects can be updated. Because not only will your projects be able to be funded if they're in SDS, but that determines the amount of funding that comes to tribes for each area. Next slide. So we use SDS for that. And if we are funding a construction project, just like for drinking water, we would also need a planning document, as well as making sure that if like right-of-ways and those types of agreements are needed, that those things are put in place prior to funding the construction. Let's see. Yeah, I think I've already covered those other things that we do fund through interagency agreements with IHS, as well as through direct grants to a tribe. Okay, so a little bit about the tribal set-aside transfer. Next slide. Thank you. Loretta's done this presentation before, so she's advancing the slides before I even need to tell her. Thanks, Loretta. So the Transfer Authority in FY 2012, Congress provided that EPA could transfer funding between the Clean Water Indian Set-Aside Program and the Drinking Water Tribal Set-Aside Program. And since 2013, when we were able to use that authority, we have, for the most part, almost every year, we've used that transfer authority, and mostly to transfer funds from the Clean Water Program to the Drinking Water Program. We usually receive more funds for clean water, and there's such a great need for the drinking water projects that we have been able to do that. At this time, the allocation, the amount of funding that we can transfer between programs is 33% of the drinking water allocation. So I don't think we've ever transferred quite that amount, but that's the amount that we could transfer from one program to another. And this year in FY 20, the year that we just funded, we transferred 1.4 million from the clean water to the drinking water set aside. The one thing to note when we do transfer those, it's an internal thing, but we do need to make sure that the projects that we're going to fund with the transfer funding, that those projects are listed on SDS, because that is a requirement for the clean water projects. So we want to make sure those drinking water projects are also included. Okay. Just another plug to put in for IHS. We work very closely with IHS because we are required to use their SDS system for funding those clean water projects. So I just wanted to provide those contacts for you for each area office. And then finally, the contact information for EPA. And I know this is really small, but you should be able to see it when you have the actual presentation in your hands. But includes information for our team leader, Emmanuel Rapacavoli, the team leader for the Tribal Drinking Water Team, myself, and I'm not even sure if I introduced myself when I started, but I'm the Drinking Water and the Clean Water Coordinator for EPA Region 9. And then we also have the Drinking Water Program Managers listed as well, and includes their the groups of tribes or the tribes that they work with. And all of this information is also found in that solicitation that I mentioned. So just a reminder, if you have projects that you would like to consider, feel free to contact me with general questions about the Drinking Water Tribal Set-Aside or the Clean Water Indian Set-Aside. If you have specific questions about a project that you're considering, you may want to contact your program manager, and those are listed here. And those project proposals for the Drinking Water Set-Aside, again, are due November 20th. Okay. That's it for my presentation. Thanks, Loretta, for your help with that. I will go back and look at questions, so just give me a minute. If anyone has questions that they want to raise their hand for, I can also take those questions as well. Sarah, I see that you had, again, put in some additional information. I'm not sure if you wanted to talk about the HUD CARES funding while I sort through these questions too.
Oh, sure. I'll do that very quickly. I know there was a question about giving examples for 2020 CARES Act funding for emergent needs on tribal lands, and some examples that I put for HUD, and some of them come because of waivers of statutory and regulatory requirements where basically PPE can be given out to all people, whether they're tribal or not. They could be employees, all residents, regardless of income and such. And then some people have been using it for hospital grade air filters for homes and taking care of rehab for homes that helps people social distance, even putting in new homes and enhancing broadband and cellular. So with the extra pull on those systems, that they remain available as people stay in place and stuff. But I just wanted to mention those real quickly.
Great, thank you, Sarah. And I think this question is actually for IHS. So let me read it. And Dan, if you can take a stab at answering. This is more of a staffing and operations question rather than infrastructure. My tribe has one water treatment operator. If he gets ill or injured and has to be placed on leave for a lengthy period of time, does IHS or any other agency have obligations to help tribe maintain its water treatment plant? For example, period of staff turnover, unexpected, sorry, I'm trying to read through this, but it's not scrolling. Unexpected leave or absence of water operator, and what's your recommendation for acquiring an interim water treatment operator? So Dana, I don't know if you want to take a stab at that, and then maybe there are some EPA folks on the line from my team that might be able to answer that as well.
I can take a stab at it from IHS's perspective. So the SFC program does not have any funds that are allocated towards O&M. Congress, although it is written as part of our program in our criteria document that I referenced before, unfortunately, there has never been any allocated funds from Congress to allow for that activity. With that said, I personally, when I was a utility consultant, have provided assistance on a very temporary basis, an intermittent basis, to keep water running, so to speak. So that would be, say, particularly in this pandemic era, everybody is, maybe there's a self-isolation due to contact tracing, something like that. And there's a real imminent need for assistance to, stop by the pump house to make sure that the pumps are running for a drinking water system. What IHS SFC cannot provide is an employee or funding an employee position where it would be somebody that would, be there for 8 hours a day for, a month or something like that. It would be more intermittent just to make sure things are running and actively working with the tribal utility to find alternative solutions, whether it be working with a nearby utility to, work, try to collaborate between, multiple rural utilities, things like that. And I can say RCAC is on the line today, and they also have technical assistance providers. I don't know their capacity currently under the pandemic, whether they have that field operations capacity or not, but I do know that they all are ex-operators and are very knowledgeable with providing that type of assistance. But it would be very temporary based, and always seeking another solution would be SFC's role in that sort of situation.
Yes, Dan, I was going to actually say the same thing. And I know Nick was on from RCAC before. I'm not sure if he, I don't want to put him on the spot, but if he wanted to raise his hand and maybe say a few words. But yeah, we rely, we have a contract with RCAC to provide that technical assistance to tribes. And I know we have relied on them throughout this pandemic, including helping with the mask distribution, which you had talked about previously. So they are able to go out and assist tribes that may have problems if an operator is not available for a time. We can't pay for, like you said, staff for a tribe to conduct those, but we can provide some assistance for those. And there was another question too, directed towards EPA, but I think, Dan, you answered that a little bit, which was whether or not, if EPA Region 9 were to have a program for O&M, what would it look like? And is it possible that Region 9 would entertain a pilot project? That question, it's a great question. It's a little bit kind of theoretical in some ways, because right now we don't have the authority to provide operation and maintenance for tribes. As Dan said, IHS does have that authority. Unfortunately, that portion of their authority is not funded by Congress. So that's the main issue for us at this point in time. So it would be a little bit hard to talk about what that program would look like at this point in time, because it's just so theoretical as far as EPA having the authority. Follow-up question, is that program something EPA could fund? Congress has to fund IHS for that program. It's not something that EPA can fund. We're allocated our funding from Congress, as is IHS. And so even though that they have the authority, it's not something EPA would fund. It's something that Congress would have to fund. So great questions, Lisa. I'm just unfortunately not able to give the answer that many people would like for me to give. Okay, any additional questions? Or any other comments on that? I know that there are some folks from my office that are on the line. If anyone else had any additional comments on that, I'd be happy to. Emmanuel, it actually looks like you're on the line. I'm not sure if you had any comments about that.
Sure, yeah, I think you did a great job, Nancy, kind of addressing that question, and Lisa and Jefferson. It is kind of the $1 million question, especially in these times, in terms of providing O&M support to tribes, tribal utilities. In a time of declining resources. And unfortunately, Congress has to not only grant us funding, but also the authority. So EPA doesn't have the authority to fund kind of O&M for utility operations. And I know that this is something IHS has been studying because they have the authority, in order to to see what a pilot program would look like. So my general thought would be it would be more likely that we would see some sort of O&M type support program funded through IHS as opposed to EPA, which runs a regulatory program. We do provide IHS funding for set-aside projects because we have the authority to fund infrastructure. That's an authority Congress has granted us, but they haven't granted us the authority to fund O&M. The other thing I would add is that we do try through our all the flexibilities that Congress has granted us, most recently through the WIN Act, to use portions of our set-aside money to fund technical assistance training, operator certification training. Those are types of things that we can fund, both through our PWSS funding and through our infrastructure funding. And we've utilized, those flexibilities to probably a greater extent than any other region in terms of trying to provide as much training, on-site circuit rider assistance as we can. But until we get that authority from Congress, it's not something we can pilot or really entertain. I think our best course is to work with either TA providers or IHS or other federal agencies that are in better positions to assist.
Thanks, Emmanuel. And I think that maybe a little bit answers Lisa's second question there about the fact that we are able to give IHS funding for the drinking water tribal set-aside projects, but she's asking if we can also give funding for the operation and maintenance. But again, we don't have that authority. So even though we may transfer money to IHS, those strings attached to the money that we have are still there. So unfortunately, if we're not able to fund operation and maintenance, we couldn't give those funds to another agency to do that type of work. There was another question that came in. Could we create a tribal water operators co-op where tribes that are close to each other can share in the cost of a common operator and would offer assistance to tribes that lose an operator until they could hire a new operator? I know that things like this have been attempted. I don't think anything as organized as a co-op, but I know that there are some operators that may work for multiple tribes. I don't know if others have any additional comments about that type of idea. I think it's a great idea, particularly for those rural areas where it may be difficult to keep and maintain an operator.
That's a great suggestion, John. The one that comes to mind is on the Hopi reservation. I know a lot of the village water systems had banded together to create a co-op for supplies and also shared sampling delivery to the labs. But I think that's a really great idea. And if we can help in any way with coordination or structuring it, I think that's something we could possibly help with. We obviously couldn't fund the operations, but maybe the technical assistance to kind of set up the structure there.
And it's Jeff Hayes. I think you could also just do that with essentially an MOU agreement. If they're, to start it out rather than getting to the formal process, they could just do a cooperative agreement for reimbursement to set something like that up as maybe as a segue to do something more formal.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is obviously a conversation we've had over the years and can continue having. Maybe it's something we set up for a future RTALK work group meeting or something where we can talk a little bit more about operation and maintenance, this idea that John has. And it looks like Lisa also put out an idea of maybe funding a lab for Eastern San Diego County. So I'm not sure if that's something that we would be able to fund through our drinking water tribal set aside, but it may be something that tribes are interested in coordinating on. Let's see, I'm not seeing any other questions. We still have about a little more than 20 minutes. If others have questions, you can type those in the chat box, or if you want to raise your hand, we can also take questions that way. And for the presenters who presented today, if you have any last thoughts before we close out, that might give some folks some time to type some questions if they have them. Sarah, did you want to say anything before we ended today?
Oh, sure. I hope you can hear me. I think you can. And I just wanted to thank everyone for taking time out of their busy day to attend and hopefully follow up with the resources that you can download and the people that you work with, because I was happy to see such a variety of people on this call, and I encourage you to work with your housing departments and have as best a collaborative approach as you can. And then I know sometimes speaking to the water operator parts of things sometimes too, if the housing is a large component, then a portion of the housing block grant could be used to help with those operating costs. But I don't know that that's something people often think about, but I just wanted to mention it and just thank everyone for being here.
Thank you, Sarah. Dan or Jeff, did you have any last thoughts?
This is Dan.
Go ahead, Dan.
I just once again wanted to thank everyone for providing the opportunity for me to speak to the IHS SFC program, and really want to impress upon the folks that are maybe in operations and maintenance for the tribes, or those that work with the O&M staff to really work early, often communicate with the IHS SFC field engineers. I've always found that direct operator to the SFC engineers communication only helps when it comes to the finished product, what the tribe receives, what the facilities look like once they're installed. I think the more operations staff involvement in those decisions, the better off the product is in the end. So I always try to encourage those communications and collaborations. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Dan. Jeff?
Yeah, again, just thank you, everybody. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. And one, I guess, as it's probably brought out, is that we can collaborate across all the agencies as well. So just that, having those conversations and bringing everybody together opens up the opportunities to maybe best fund specific elements that are better suited for each programs. And there's a great way to collaborate to do that. So just keeping the communication open. And that's it. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. And that's a great point to make at the end. We gave you a lot of information today. A lot of these funds can be combined into funding larger projects. So if you have any questions about any of the information we went through today, there was a lot of it in kind of a short amount of time. Please feel free to reach out to any of us to talk more about those projects. Thanks to the speakers and Loretta for moderating our session. And a big thank you to John and your staff at San Pasqual. I think I saw at one point we had about 80 participants, which is great in this type of setting. We're really able to reach a lot more people than we are in person. So I really appreciate you guys pulling this together and allowing us to present this information. So thanks, everyone. 84, I guess John is saying that we had at one point. So thank you, John. And thanks, everyone. We will give you back some time to take a break between now and the next sessions that are starting. Thanks, everyone.